You said that food could make people more curious about the world. Why do you think food opens up people in a way, that politics or history or even books may not be able to?
I always say this, and I say it with no sort of, in no way demeaning tone. Food is the lowest form of accessing culture. Like, you want to find out about somebody, if I want to know what it was like to grow up to be with you, I would say invite me over for lunch. People have really short attention spans. It's not a great thing. There's all kinds of, the Van Gogh experience, Meow Wolf, all these things.
What does, street vendors tell you or tell us about immigration and stuff like that?
For as long as there's been in New York, actually for as long as there's been New Amsterdam, there's been street vendors. It is the sort of lowest rung on the economic ladder for new Americans.
What is one meal you wish every New Yorker could sit down and eat together, and what conversation do you think that would spark?
I think about this question a lot. I have many answers, but I actually think, and I say this as somebody who doesn't know.
Welcome back to the Omelets podcast, where we explore the ideas, stories, and people shaping the way we understand the world. Today I'm joined by Nazli Parvizi, the president of MoFad, the Museum of Food and Drink, in Brooklyn, whose work sits at a fascinating intersection between food, culture, and hospitality. Food is something we all experience every day, but we often forget how much meaning it carries. A meal can tell us where someone comes from, what they value, what they've inherited, what they have lost, and what they're trying to preserve. It can reveal stories of migration, family, identity, class, community, and belonging. Nazli, thank you very much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Right, to get started then, could you briefly describe your journey and background and how that has led you to where you now are?
Not a straight line for all of those who would like some inspiration there. Food has always been a thread line through my life. I'm an immigrant to this country. My mom is the best chef and baker that I know. But it was born out of a love of reading and running out of books. And my mom would just kind of throw cookbooks at me and just say, read this until you can get to the library next week. So I always just read cookbooks. But my best friend's mom opened up a tea shop when I was about 14 and said, I'm looking for a waitress. And I was like, oh, I like to cook. So I started there. And within a year or two, I think she realized she didn't have to show up on the weekends and work anymore if she stuck me in the kitchen. And so basically every weekend through high school, every vacation, and then all through college vacations and summers, I worked at that tea shop. So for about 8 or 9 years, I did that. Went to college, studied biology, which was a big mistake, but again, immigrant kid. Switched to food anthropology and thought I maybe would go get a PhD in that. And in the meantime, for anyone who's worked in academics, you make no money. And I started a catering company. And right after 9/11, my catering partner and I, from Night Kitchen, which still exists, still run by one of my best friends, we ran down to ground zero after 9/11. Just people were trying to give blood, people were trying to help, and we're like, well, we know how to cook. So we just started bringing food, as of September 12th. And kind of ended up running, being part of this massive feeding effort and doing our small role in that effort. And funny enough, that kind of led to a very different change of paths for me. At some point, Mike Bloomberg became the mayor. I got a call from people who were part of that volunteer effort who said, you should come work for the city. And I did. I basically ran the city's volunteer center, and then I became commissioner of community affairs. So I took this really funny pivot away from food and away from academics towards government and politics. And that was the main part of my career. Then I had a kid. Things happened. I was sort of playing here and there around the edges, doing a lot of infrastructure work, hurricane recovery work, and I got a call about the food museum. And then I sort of came right back to food.
Right, and you said that food could make people more curious about the world. Why do you think food opens up people in a way, that politics or history or even books may not be able to?
A couple of reasons, right? One is we all eat, right? Hopefully. We all eat. The other thing, I always say this, and I say it with no sort of, in no way demeaning tone. Food is the lowest form of accessing culture. You want to find out about somebody, if I want to know what it was like to grow up to be with you, I would say invite me over for lunch, invite me over to your grandma's house, your parents' house, whoever. It is the gateway to people's culture. And the thing is, it's a delicious gateway and it's an approachable gateway. I always say, I love art. Visual arts was always my first love. And once a year on my birthday, my mom would take me to the Met. There's not a single painting where somebody looked like me. That's okay. I still learned to appreciate it, but I was not. My culture was never reflected. unless it was literally stolen, you know what I mean? Like in the Asian wing or whatever. And even there, that wasn't like my culture being represented by my people. And so again, in that way, like you want to learn about somebody, food is the way. And there's a joy to it. You know, there's not a single story about food, frankly, that doesn't in some way boil down to some terrible story, frankly, around like colonialism or enslavement. But there's so much joy and deliciousness that it's easier to learn that history. And I think that's the interesting about MoFad. We tackle really hard topics. We don't shy away from things, but I think there's an ultimate joy in food and an ultimate celebration that makes it just easier to confront different histories.
Right, and you mentioned in university you studied food anthropology. For someone who may not know, what that really is, could you explain that simply?
It didn't exist really as a major when I sort of made it up. The anthropology department was so kind to me to let me do it. But in a nutshell, it is the study of the culture, the social aspects and the economic aspects around food production and consumption. So why do we eat what we eat? How do we produce food? And again, to me, anthropology takes a lot of different forms. It was a much more interesting way of looking at different societies. And, for all of that, I was actually much more interested in what people didn't eat. I think that's a lot more telling. So all of my work was actually around the Haitian diet. I was really obsessed with Haitian culture and the many myriad ways that U.S. policies screwed up that country, but especially screwed up the diets there. So it's just it is anthropology, but through the lens of food. And you can just see all the shift in economics and culture and migration. I always say when I talk about various things in food, there's a lot of Devil Wears Prada moments where you think you chose what's on your plate, but it was definitely chosen for you by a couple people in a room that you never see. And, the more you know about your food, where it comes from, who's making it, how it got to your plate, the more educated you are, the better the choices you make.
Right, and you obviously became involved with MoFad at a very challenging time around COVID. I mean, what did that teach you about leadership, and how did you overcome that challenge?
I mean, don't take over a nonprofit during COVID. I got a call basically saying, look, we're heavily in debt. We lost our space. We're about to shut down. Any chance you want to save this institution? And it's funny because I've now been having talks with various people of like, was it the right thing or not to sort of save an institution? Like, are there times when the door should close and are there times where they should stay open? I love the idea after many years, in a nutshell, my roles in government and infrastructure and hurricane work can be summed up by saying, I was paid to be screamed at. And that's okay, I can handle it, and people are angry and they always have a right to be angry. World is a tough place these days. I was looking for some joy in my life because COVID was a messed up time, and I just wanted to not be screamed at, for a living. So that was my personal reasons for taking on a job like this. And in terms of leadership, it was about, first of all, trying to rally people that you hadn't met yet, right? I took the job while I was in California. Most people were in New York. The museum now is in New York, even though we didn't have a space then. But I think it's really, COVID was an opportunity to bring people together in very different ways and in meaningful ways, and people were looking for connection. And again, the role of food could not have been more profound in that time. And so I think we took that job seriously in trying to build community and showing what that could look like, right? And showing that even if the table is virtual, it can still be a table where all of us can gather.
Right. So traditional museums, obviously, quiet places where you look at objects behind glass. What does a museum of food and drink offer that's very different to traditional museums?
We always say we're a new type of museum, and I think we're ever revolving, and there is going to be a next phase of MoFad. I think, again, maybe because of COVID or just changing technology, changing times, museums have had to radically rethink how they present information. In the age of Wikipedia, you can't just go and read something on a wall and just go read text. I think we've always been ahead of the curve in that sense as a food museum. Partially, we don't sort of focus on rare collections and rare collectibles. And so it gives a certain freedom to go through our collections and through our exhibitions in a different way. And I mean that, like, there's a reason why you can't be munching on Doritos as you go through the Metropolitan Museum, right? Like, you don't want to like harm the sculptures and the paintings. We try to not be precious about most things, so that you can sort of eat and taste and smell your way through the exhibitions. And there's value in that, right? Like, first of all, it's fun, right? From an educational standpoint, when you make learning multidimensional, when you put in your sensory experiences, when it's also includes literally all 5 senses, you retain the information better. So for our school groups especially, I think we take a lot of pride and joy in the way that we present our museum's offerings. I think people sometimes think of a food museum as trite, and maybe that's because of the Museum of Ice Cream or things like that, or again, just food is a very wide topic and not always respected as a form of actual culture. But again, I think when you come through the museum, you realize instantly what it's about and the message, like what we're trying to get across and how we get across, and that we're using these tools of smelling, eating, whatever, as a way of literally imbibing knowledge. The food puns are out of control. I'll start there. But yeah, I think there's really different ways of presenting info. And people have really short attention spans. It's not a great thing. There's all kinds of, like, the Van Gogh experience, Meow Wolf, all these things, and they all have their place, and there's lessons to be learned. So we also have to learn about the fact that people want a faster experience, that they want to be entertained, and it's up to us to sort of figure out what that line is of being entertained and still being an educational resource. Our mandate, unlike some of those other places, is that we're first an educational institution, right? But within that mandate, I think there's ways of making it much more interesting within the resources that we have.
Right, and for those who may not know, what are some of the things that you hold in the museum?
So again, it's one exhibition at a time, and I can get into what's next. But the last exhibition, for example, was on the history of flavor. Most people have no idea that there's actually a flavor industry, right? And part of that was because so many people lost their sense of smell during COVID and had no idea what was going on in their bodies. And we wanted to break that down in a scientific way, also in a cultural way. And so it was literally tastings of like MSG, salt, sweetness. What is that? Smell tests. We had a brainwave machine that read your brainwaves while you were having something super sour or super sweet to see how your brain reacted to things. The differences in the history behind vanilla and vanillin. So there was that. Right now, we have an incredible exhibition on the history of street food in New York City. Again, I have noticed that the language around both vending, but especially around migration, immigration, is always kind of vitriolic in this country, but it was particularly nasty in New York City, which I wasn't used to. And so our way of backing into what we want to talk about is to think of a topic that lets us talk about it. And there's no better way of talking about immigration in New York City than through street food. And so you go through this exhibition, you have a VR experience where you're in a taco truck, you see how trucks get built, kids actually design their own trucks and sort of sell their own wares. You get halva at the end, you get nuts for nuts, you get pretzels. So you kind of experience what it's like to be a street vendor. And it starts from the 1600s to today. And along the way, you get all these facts, and what we're trying to do is just humanize what it means to not only be a vendor, but what does it actually mean to be out on the streets for 12 hours a day with very few breaks, regardless of the weather, trying to sell food in order to feed your own family, right? So again, we try to do it with a level of joy, but it's also to sort of really put people in other people's shoes, right? The only way you learn about other people, we always say step into their shoes, but honestly, eat what they're eating.
Right. And how often do these exhibitions happen, and what's next for MoFad?
So the exhibitions, we're in Dumbo right now in Brooklyn Bridge Park, which has been a lovely sort of gift to us. And we sort of try to stay for like the entire year of the tourist cycle. But we're going to shut down our exhibition at the end of July. And to your point of what's it like and what does leadership look like, what's clear and has always been clear is having a small space with one exhibition at a time will never allow us to grow. We were on an upward trajectory, and COVID just kind of knocked us flat. And I think it was important for us to kind of reestablish a space and reestablish a couple exhibitions again. And it kind of put us on the map again, but it is not allowing us to thrive. And so what we're going to do is we're going to close the exhibition down, and we're basically going to work on a capital campaign for the next 3 to 5 years to kind of build the MoFad that we've always envisioned, a 3 to 5 story space with multiple exhibitions, a cafe, a children's wing, a garden. What's really clear for nonprofits is the nonprofit model doesn't work. The Metropolitan Opera is in bankruptcy. Museums with millions of dollars of endowments are in trouble. And it's hard. Government funding has been slashed around social services. Philanthropy works really differently. The older generation who gave is frankly dying off, and the new generation of wealth gives in a very different way if they give it all. And so I think nonprofits have to be nimble and have to be thoughtful about how they're going to survive if they're going to survive. So I think for us, it's really about rethinking, how do you do earned income? What does it mean to have events? What kind of partnerships do you need? So I'm hoping that, we have a great exhibition, we close out this exhibition, and then we sort of regroup with all the people who have been very invested in this organization and come back bigger and better.
Right, and you mentioned street vendors, and obviously this is what so the exhibition is kind of focused on right now. In New York, street vendors are everywhere, and people sort of take it for granted. What does street vendors tell you or tell us about immigration and stuff like that?
For as long as there's been in New York, actually for as long as there's been New Amsterdam, there's been street vendors. It is the sort of lowest rung on the economic ladder for new Americans. And it is a story, I think, of resilience. It is, no one wants to be a street vendor, right? It is the job that you do when there are no other options. That's why you have children walking through the subway right now selling candy, which was not something I saw. I moved here in 1995, right? So I've been here for well over 25 years. Life as a vendor is difficult. And it's interesting, I had someone go through the exhibition and say, this exhibition really humanized vendors. And they weren't being insulting, but I was like, I didn't know you didn't think they were human. But I get what she was saying. It's almost like street furniture, right? You just get used to walking by vendors. And, I live in Dumbo, where my neighborhood is like on riots against vendors. I get it. I live on the most photographed street in America. It's super packed. It's crowded. People don't want the food vendors there. But again, part of me is like, I don't think this is the biggest problem in our neighborhood. Like, I live in a really wealthy neighborhood. The fact that the vendors are the biggest problems, we're in a good spot. I ran community affairs for the city. I've been in every neighborhood in New York. I know what a neighborhood in decline or a neighborhood in crisis looks like. But it's interesting. The only time you go through the exhibition, it started, one of the things that I find really interesting is in the early days of vending, a lot of times it was women. It still is 50% women, which you don't visibly see very often for different reasons. And a lot of that is because only 27% of them actually have permits. So only 27% are legal vendors. But since the earliest days, it was often women or younger girls. They would take their baskets, they would take the ferry to Brooklyn or Queens, to the farms there, get fresh fruits and vegetables, bring it back to Manhattan. And one of the things that vendors did was always provide actually fresher and more affordable fruits and vegetables than what immigrants could get in stores. So partially it was a way of immigrants taking care of each other. And that's still the case. A lot of vending, especially again, unlicensed vending, is people taking care of their own people. So you go to any construction site in the city at lunchtime, you'll see a bunch of men coming off the construction site and women coming out with coolers and handing out packets. And it's like, if the guys are from Honduras, there's like a Honduran woman making like a fantastic meal. They, maybe it's a cousin, whatever the system is. I kind of keep my eye out for these things, and you see it at almost every construction site. So a lot of it is, this is how people were able to feed their own people. Increasingly, sort of in the more modern history, it became sort of immigrants feeding other people. So that's where you get like the halal guys or the hot dog guys in Central Park, and that became its own phenomenon. The Red Hook taco trucks, that was meant to be Mexicans feeding the Mexican soccer players. And then everyone kind of caught wind in the early days and kind of went after it. which also means the health department went after it and basically shut the whole thing down. But there is this sort of interesting phenomenon of what vending was always meant to be, was a way of communities taking care of their own communities, and what it's become, which is this idea of immigrants feeding others and kind of introducing their foods to others, which I think is wonderful. I mean, hamburgers were foreign foods, hot dogs were foreign foods, tacos, foreign, halal, that's, if you know what halal means, means the same thing as kosher. It doesn't mean a plate of chicken and rice, right. But we're just used to calling it halal. So it introduces this like fascinating sort of set of dishes and vernaculars that we just take for granted now, which is great. It kind of weaves its way into the social fabric of the city and into what we consider the sort of iconic foods of the city.
Right. I think you made a very interesting point that around 50% or even a slight majority of street vendors are actually women.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, to be completely honest, in my opinion, I'm very surprised by that fact.
You and everyone else.
And why is that? Why do we not know that?
I think part of it is they're more invisible. So when I say street vendor, I think a lot of people probably rightfully think of like the halal guys, the hot dog vendors. And one of the things folks, again, don't realize is when you have those heavy trucks, those trucks have to be physically carted. Sometimes it's on foot. A lot of times it's on a hitch now because the commissaries are further away. It's a lot of physical labor. Every single day, those trucks have to be returned to a large commissary. And as real estate gets more expensive, those commissaries get further and further away. Every night they get cleaned. Those commissaries are basically kitchens. So most of the cooking for the trucks happens in these licensed commissaries. It's like a restaurant. They get inspected by the Department of Health like any other food establishment. What happens in the cart is basically assembly, right? But it's really physically taxing work. So I think a lot of times it's hard for women to operate a cart like that on their own. Again, it's heavy. We have a cart in the exhibition, just a simple sort of hot dog cart, and we just sort of tell people to spin it around a few times just to get an idea of what it's like to cart it around. And imagine then doing that for a mile or two at the end of a day and the beginning of a day. So I think part of that is the physical labor. I think the other thing is you're standing on your feet. A lot of times your day starts at 4 or 5 a.m. You go to the commissary, you pick up your goods, you hitch your thing, you get to your spot, you're on your feet. If you're lucky enough to have colleagues nearby, you can maybe catch a bathroom break here and there. Otherwise, you can't. And then you rinse and repeat the whole thing and go back to the commissary. So you're looking at like 12 to 14-hour days. Again, a lot of women, especially if they're parents, a lot of these men are supporting families. So the majority of street vendors are supporting women and children in their families. I think a lot of the women are also caretakers of their children, so they can't afford to be out for those 18 hours. So that's part of it. So I think between the physical labor, the sort of caretaking role that they also have to play, but also the sort of navigation of the licensing. The majority of, until the city council finally passed a very comprehensive set of bills in February, it's a black market game. And again, navigating that world of the black market game, like it was kind of a man's world. And, there's sexism there. Even the street corners, again, fighting for the right street corner, it's not all like a nice story. Like people were slashing each other's tires and getting into fist fights. There's some masculine energy there that's pretty toxic. And I don't think a lot of women can play in that game. But I also think, again, the kind of cooking they do or the kind of cooking that's asked for, the flexibility they need, often comes from unlicensed work in their kitchen, going to like, again, out of coolers or in the fruit carts, that you see sort of the sort of pulley granny carts, that kind of thing. But it is surprising, but it is 50%. As I said, I think it's just less visible. And I think women are, you said there's street carts everywhere. I think the ones that we think are everywhere are really the sort of the halal carts, the hot dog carts. I think if you go into like inner Queens and the Bronx and Brooklyn, that's where you see more women. And again, they're catering more to their own communities.
Right. What is one meal you wish every New Yorker could sit down and eat together? And what conversation do you think that would spark?
I think about this question a lot. I have many answers, but I actually think, and I say this as somebody who doesn't love chicken, I love the idea of everyone sitting at the longest table, TM, and having chicken and rice. Because with some exceptions, obviously, around the world, Many, many cultures have their version of chicken and rice. And I kind of love that. I love that. Because my other answer was like a dumpling from every culture, right? Like, I'm also obsessed with the idea that like almost every culture has like their sambusak, their manti, their whatever. But chicken and rice, first of all, like blah, right? It's like white on white. It couldn't be like a more boring. But it's this sort of meal that's so economical. If you're going to eat meat, chicken is by far the cheapest, highest protein, whatever. It couldn't be more tasteless as far as a protein and a starch go. And yet, again, when you think of halal, when you think of arroz con pollo, when you think of like chicken vindaloo, when you think of, I mean, every single country, Hunanese chicken, every single culture has managed to take this like blah dish and make it so delicious. And so the idea of like a table full of everyone's version of chicken and rice. And again, what does that say about the spice trade, colonialism, immigration, like all of it, the stories that you can trade about how this dish of like boiled chicken, boiled rice became every version, that we see, I think is just so cool.
And with the rise of social media, is there a danger that as food becomes trendy, through Instagram or through celebrities, that we lose the deeper stories behind it?
It's like everything with social media, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think the lousiest part about it is everyone's chasing trends in a way that I find, listen, I'm almost 50, like I'm a boomer as far as like my son's generation is concerned. I find it pathetic that like everyone wants to stand in a line to try this thing so they can say they tried the thing. And by kind of following the trend and standing in line and doing the thing, you're just trying to make sure that you were a part of it. And I just think you miss the larger lesson of what does it mean? What's the story behind it? All of that. I also think the sad thing about that is everyone's chasing the next hot thing, and we're losing so many good legacy restaurants. It's really hard for like a solid, wonderful neighborhood restaurant to stay open when everyone is trying to chase the next hot thing. And to me, that's like the difference between a Paris and a New York. Not to say Paris isn't changing either, but like I've been going to Paris since I was a little kid. For the most part, the restaurants I love are still there. Like there's loyalty towards the restaurants. People remember, neighborhoods sort of support their restaurants. There's a culture of eating out, all the things. And here, our favorite game, I was no longer live in Fort Greene, but was there from like 2000 till about 2017, give or take moves in between. And my friends and my favorite game is to sit at a restaurant, try to name the 6 restaurants that were there before it, right? Because every single thing changes. Change isn't bad. It's just the things that you love often disappear because everyone's chasing the next thing. So that's to me the downside of people chasing. And again, the TikTok 30-second recipe. When you're trying to condense something to 30 seconds, you're missing the love behind it, the culture behind it. People are just trying to make something like razzmatazzy. And by the way, those recipes, for the most part, kind of suck. Like, that's my hot take. I've never seen one of those recipes actually work out that well. It's fun. Like, it introduces people to cooking. It makes it less scary. I like that kids cook. Me cooking 8, I was like a prodigy. Now you've got like 11-year-olds competing on, Chopped or whatever. It's become way more accessible. You don't need to go to cooking school. You can just sort of start doing it and learn it. And I kind of like that. So that's the other flip side of it. And there is a long form, right, on Instagram of storytelling. And that does get out and that does tell stories. And I love that. That's how we get to share, our programming and what we do. That's how individuals who are just interested. The problem is not everyone fact checks. You don't know what the source is, but I like, it's just a double-sided sword, like everything with social media. So you can gain a lot of knowledge, but you can also sort of dismiss a lot of culture and history behind food.
Right. You mentioned cooking competitions. Mm-hmm. What's your view on cooking shows? And to ask an even funnier question, what's your view on Gordon Ramsay?
Interesting. I grew up on Julia Child.
Right.
And I loved it. We didn't have cable growing up. So I grew up on watching her and loved her. And it's interesting. My boyfriend and I were watching some Bobby Flay Takedown because I was trying to figure out a paella recipe. And he's been there for like 20 years, which is fascinating. the Food Network came and again introduced an entire generation to making food less scary. And I love that. On the other hand, everyone on the Food Network has been on the Food Network for like 25 years. So as much as there's this movement to sort of make room for people of color and different kinds of food and whatever, and as much as these guys celebrate different cultures and different food, I give them a lot of credit for that. Like, people hold on to their jobs. Like, I'm not saying they need to step off, but like, there's certainly not a lot of space in the Food Network world for like the new generation of up and coming chefs, and certainly not of people of color and women and whatever. So there's sort of the critiques end of that kind of stuff. But do I think people learn a lot? Sure. I think competition is fun. It gamifies things. Would I rather have them watch that than some stupid reality TV show? Absolutely. Like, it's fine. And Gordon Ramsay, I've never watched any of these things regularly. What I can always tell about him is he kind of underneath it all has a heart of gold. Like, that's what I always see. I took the masterclass during COVID. He's an excellent teacher. And the fact that he's a bit of a dick is also clearly obvious. What's fascinating to me is the person who taught him, right? It's like a cycle of abuse was horrendous, right? And the way that people were taught to work in kitchens and the way that they were taught to sort of command, and the leadership question you said, is passed down generationally. And then at some point, people said, enough. And the sad thing is, it started out with like allegations of sexual abuse and sexual assault, and then just sort of filtered to like, we're just treated like crap, all of us, never mind the stuff that's illegal and disgusting. Like, this culture of abuse opens the door to other kinds of abuse and people just not speaking up. So I'm glad to see that like there's been a shift in both how people view leadership, but also how people expect to be treated. That said, with Gordon Ramsay at least, like, there's a level of discipline that he demands. Again, I'm sorry to be generational about it. It's really hard work to work in a kitchen. There's a reason why it's mostly an immigrant job. And you want to kick out immigrants in this country, like, good luck ever eating a good meal again in your fancy restaurants. These are folks who have to work 14 hours a day. Like, I'm sorry, there's just maybe there's a healthier way of running a restaurant. I hope so, but it's really hard work and you have to work your way up, and there's no yoga breaks in the middle. So you would hope that in the midst of all that, you get support and tutelage rather than like having a pot thrown at your head. But I hope he's also mellowed out. But the flip side is I do appreciate that there's a discipline that's necessary to work in a space that small with that many people, not get hurt, not get burned, and provide consistent service. Because I'm looking at it from the whole thing, but mostly I'm also a customer. And my friends hate eating at restaurants with me. I don't actually eat out that much. People think, oh, you run a food museum, where should I eat? And I'm like, I don't know, come to my house. Like, I'm a picky eater, and I'm picky about restaurants, and the thing I prize the most is consistency. And that is the hardest thing for a restaurant to pull through, right? Every day, in and out, rotating staff, rotating food, rotating ingredients, to pull off consistently good food. That's the challenge, not innovation to me. Like, everyone's great at that.
Right, so what's your favorite dish then, and why?
In general?
In general.
Oh, I'm always like try to have something in my head and like to be more interesting. I think Caesar salad is a perfect food. Like, sorry, I can't come up with like some perfect Iranian dish, but like Caesar salad is a perfect food. It's got like this crispiness of the lettuce, the umami of the fish, like the croutons, the Parmesan. It's like an umami bomb with like the coolness of like this blah crispy lettuce underneath it. I love a good Caesar salad. And in general, I'm like a veggie nut. I'm a vegetarian masked as a carnivore. But yeah, I think that's an incredible dish. I love the history behind it. I love that you can still go to Tijuana and still get the original, and it's like apparently still phenomenal. But yeah, I think that's amazing. And then everything else still has like a twinge of nostalgia. Like, I love my mom's sour cherry rice.
Right.
It's just so good. But I was in LA. I did not grow up anywhere near an Iranian community, but I was in LA and was in Glendale, which is Armenian and Persian. And, my friend was like, are you crying right now? And I was like, it's just when you have something that tastes so good and like it's so hard to get, yeah, I was having this perfect Armenian pastry that my mom makes, but it takes hours, so she makes it like once a year. And I was totally having a kebab at 7 a.m. for breakfast. The guys were like, yeah, we'll light up the grill for you. There's so much nostalgia around what you love. Like there's foods I think that are like technically perfect, but like anybody else, there's also just foods that are so nostalgic to me. And especially right now with what's going on in the world, the fact that like my country's being bombed and destroyed, I'm so homesick, and I'm just sort of missing, again, I feel this with people, whether they're Israeli, Palestinian, Iranian, whatever, like it's a way of connecting with your people is always through food, right? And when shit hits the fan, sorry for swearing, as it really feels like it has these days around the world, like you sort of, I think, go towards your food and towards your people in a way to try to find those connections. So I don't need to I'm actually not I don't particularly feel seen within the community I'm a part of, the Iranian community politically. But when I'm sitting there eating my little unripe plums and dipping them in salt, there's I feel good.
Right. To wrap things off then, I guess, you mentioned you did an exhibition on spices and flavors. What's one fun fact you can tell the audience?
Well, I don't know if anyone thinks of it this way, but it was a show on flavor, right? And sort of what happens with your tongue, what happens with, and I think one of the things that kind of blew people's minds were Columbus left looking for shorter routes to India, to the Spice Islands.
Right.
And so we're spice trade kicked off colonialism and enslavement as we know it. And I think that, again, people thought it was a sciencey show, and they were like, oh yeah, that was the search for flavor. What sugar did for the world was mind-boggling in the worst way possible. You lose 30% of your taste buds by the time you're 60. I don't know why that's surprising, because you lose your hearing and your eyesight, but your taste and your smell are like any one of your senses, they degrade too. So if you ever notice older people putting a lot of hot sauce or salt, they're trying to sort of coax flavor out. And if you smoke, forget it, you're accelerating it if you've had chemo or things like that. But I think people are always surprised by the idea that you lose your taste buds or you lose your sense of smell as you age. Fun fact, I guess.
Perfect. That was my conversation with Nazli Parvizi, the president of the Museum of Food and Drink. In a world that often feels divided, rushed, and disconnected, perhaps food offers something quietly profound, a way to slow down, sit together, and become curious about one another again. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone who loves food, culture, or just even a good conversation. And as always, we'll see you next time.